You are listening to Rooted to Earth, a SAE Innova podcast.
Our generation has to put its house in order. We can't leave this for another generation. So impact is what we need to deliver. Key in impact is knowledge. We need the public and private sectors to be talking to each other. Farming and farmers get bad press, yet actually some of the most dynamic, multidisciplined, skilled people in Europe sit on farms. Nobody knows more about sustainability than a farming family. And do you know the one thing about a farming family is they want to leave the next generation the farm in better shape than they got.
This is a space for real conversations, from farmers and scientists to community leaders and innovators, each of them working to bring nature back into balance. This is Rooted to Earth. On today's episode, we talk with John Gilliland, recently appointed to the EU's Soul Mission Board and serving as a special advisor to the UK's Agriculture and Horticultural Development Board. He's a leader in sustainable agriculture from Northern Ireland, and as a willow and livestock farmer, his farm has been verified as beyond net zero. John is also a professor of practice in agriculture and sustainability at Queen's University Belfast and chairs the farmer-led carbon farming project ARC0. His experience spans public policy advising, private sector innovation, and academic leadership. Hi, John. Thank you for being here with us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
You have worked in politics as a practitioner and as a hands-on leader, wearing many hats throughout your career. So what lessons and insights have you taken from each of these roles? I imagine that experiencing the realities of each sector allows you to understand them more deeply and articulate them more effectively.
Well, I've been very fortunate. I've had a diverse career. I studied agriculture and I came home and I ran my own family farm. I'm a fifth generation farmer right on the border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. And I've been an award-winning farmer, and at a young age, I got involved in agricultural politics and became the youngest ever president of the Farmers Union in Northern Ireland, just in time for the great outbreak of hoof and mouth or foot and mouth and back in 2001. And it really taught me about crisis management and how policymakers actually think. When I retired, I became an energy regulator, but I then I chaired a multi-stakeholder group for the UK government on climate change, farming, food and forestry. And then I ran a research farm for 8 years as well. So my strength is my ability. I can look at an issue through multiple different lenses. And actually, my key lesson I've learned from all of this is there are no silver bullets left out there. As we want change, positive change for society and for our landscapes, you actually do need to look at complexity. Complex solutions are the name of the game. It's how do we interconnect it, and so that we can look for delivering multiple public goods at the same time. I get very frustrated at the moment. Coming from Ireland, we have a lot of livestock, a lot of debate about methane emissions, and everyone wants to go to the silver bullet. And the silver bullet for methane is to put in a feed inhibitor. And I'm saying nonsense, because a feed inhibitor does nothing else for water quality, for biodiversity, for economics. And so we would much prefer to look at weeding ourselves off from synthetic nitrogen and monocultures of grass and looking at multi-species wards, looking at reintroducing legumes, looking at bringing our biodiversity alive in our soil, allowing our soil to deliver its multiple functions for society. We think that's a far better way than still trying to find those silver bullets. They're very few and far between, and most of them have perverse consequences.
What happens along the journey from the challenges faced by farmers to the corridors of political decision-making where laws and regulations are shaped?
Well, policymakers and politicians make decisions on data that's given to them. If we're looking at climate smart farming, the data we're given comes from the Greenhouse Gas National Inventory, which is very crude. It is to what we call tier 1, sometimes tier 2, so either an international average or a national average. And my passion has been, actually, we want to get to tier 3, so it's actual farm data. And so we are making decisions on crude information, and we're asking farmers and land managers to respond, but in a manner that is tier 3. And so there's an unfairness there. So the one thing I have learned, if you're advising governments, is to make sure you use the best evidence on the day to make that decision. And we're not at the moment. Our greenhouse gas inventory, our national inventories, in my opinion, need to be smartened. And we haven't invested in them. So the success of the work I have done is I have led on-farm measurement. And I've led it in 2 different ways. I've led it where we've used aerial LiDAR technology, where we scan our landscape at 40 scans per square meter, where we actually come and we take out soil cores to 1 meter deep. And we look at the totality of the picture of our carbon stocks. And then we repeat it every 5 years and we measure actual change, giving us a tier 3 factor, which we can feed both into the food supply chain who are needing scope 3 emission data, but also into government so that we can smarten the greenhouse gas national inventories. And for me, having that accuracy is the only way we will deliver integrity. And that integrity is both facing to wider society who's concerned that farming is not putting its house in order, but also integrity to those farm businesses who are actually facing their responsibility. But currently the mechanism, so if I lead behavioral change, I go into a calculator that uses a national average or an international average. So my positivity gets dumbed down and it gets diluted. And in doing that, the goodness of what I do gets masked, while people at the other end who are doing nothing get hidden and are carried by my good. Now, why is that a tool to get behavioral change? It won't deliver. And my passion is about getting actual farm business decision makers to go on a journey of positive change. And we need a reporting system that is accurate, but a reporting system that rewards the people who actually do deliver and exposes the people who sit in their hands and do nothing. And so that has been at the forefront of the work I've done in Europe, the work I've done in Ireland, the work I've done in the United Kingdom, is actually how do we bring integrity, granularity, really good measure reporting and verification. So we go on a journey of integrity so we can all hold our heads up high and see the journey that we're actually on.
You are also a professor of practice in agriculture and sustainability at Queen's University Belfast. So my next question is, what role does knowledge transfer and communication play in transforming how we have done things traditionally for so many years? For example, if we talk about farmers and building their trust and commitment towards transforming their practices.
Well, first of all, my award, it is an honorary award, but actually it's recognition by our great institutions of universities and researchers, is that practitioners, I don't have, I'm not a degree graduate, but I am a practitioner who's led the field, and a recognition from academia is you actually do need to reach out to key high achievers within industry and actually bring them in. Because if I dare to be critical of universities and higher research institutes, they are more interested in the pipeline of published and peer-reviewed papers than they are in actually delivering impact. My passion, I'm a grandfather of 4 great-grandchildren, is our generation has to put its house in order. We can't leave this for another generation. So impact is what we need to deliver. Key in impact is knowledge. And the journey that we have been on is how do we inform and give farmers better knowledge about their own business? not about their neighbors, but their own business. Because once you give them really good quality data about their own farm that they've never seen before, do you know something? They make better quality decisions. If they make better quality decisions, you accelerate that journey of positive change. And so knowledge exchange is fundamental, but it needs to be clearly focused as being relevant to the decision maker who has the difficult decisions to make.
We were mentioning before all the roles you have been occupying. So as a willow and livestock farmer in Northern Ireland, your farm has been independently verified as beyond net zero. Can you tell us about the research and implementation journey and what challenges you encountered along the way?
So, well, what I would say, first of all, on this journey, where we started off is we actually defined what net zero is. And, everyone talks about net zero and then they go straight to emissions. And they forget that most farmers don't just have animals or crops, they've got a landscape. And so the very first thing we did 5 years ago when we started this journey is we created a definition of net zero, which I have used many times and nobody has dared tell me I'm wrong. And that is net zero for a farm business is where I reduce my emissions enough, I build my carbon stocks up enough, I displace my fossil fuels with renewables, and I mitigate any waste by using things like anaerobic digestion. So basically, I've got a complex farm business that's looking at my emissions. I'm looking at building my carbon stocks. I'm looking at embedding renewables. I'm looking at embedding waste management technologies. When all of those come to zero, that is when my business is at zero. It does not mean that my cattle belch less. That is not what it means. But it means I, as a businessman, am facing my responsibility. Just like when I'm going to a supermarket to buy my groceries, okay? They will have fridges and freezers, but on their roof, they'll have a PV panel or whatever else, and they will be using renewable electricity to displace the carbon footprint of the fridges and freezers within that. So that is an inset. And we use insets within our business. We don't trade them outside our business, but we look at the totality of the business. And I look at the toolbox, and there are a lot of different tools that I have used. So the very first thing we did is we did our baseline. Is where are we today? We did that. We then benchmarked ourselves against our peers to see where are we good, where are we not so good, and that allowed us to prioritize what were the actions we were going to take. But we also have a very close relationship with the science community, not only with Queen's University Belfast, but with Wageningen University Research in the Netherlands as well. We've been very fortunate that we've had a succession of very capable master's students who want to come to our farm and do their thesis at our farm. Now, on my farm, we've done some extra funky things. One of them is we're now grazing our short rotation willow trees. We harvest them every year, and the cattle eat the regrowth. Why are we doing this? Well, we found, Queen's University Belfast found that the leaf of willow is full of condensed tannins. Condensed tannins interrupt the formation of methane. And so far in the field, we have recorded a 27% reduction of methane per day on cattle grazing willows over cattle grazing grass. And at the same time, my trees are taking more carbon out of the sky and building up my carbon stocks. So there is a classic where I'm reducing my emissions, not to zero, because I can't. Cattle live. They will always give out emissions. But I'm also building up my carbon stocks. And because I'm bringing one part of the balance sheet down, one part of the balance sheet up, I accelerate my journey. Now, the extra advantage I have had on my farm is I have a big renewable heat project as well. So actually, the big win on my farm has been displacing fossil fuels using my grown biomass from my willow grown in the 3 years previous to that. And so it's completely circular. And so when we actually did, so we used an outside team from SRUC in Scotland called AgriCalc, and they came in and they completely measured then our emissions and estimated our carbon stocks, while we physically went out and measured our carbon stocks. Now, carbon stocks is very difficult to measure. And at the moment, our assumptions are very crude. And that is where we went beyond best practice. And only 2 weeks ago, I spoke at the European Environment Agency's and European Space Agency's conference in Copenhagen, where I explained to them that we've measured our landscape at 40 scans per square meter using LiDAR, and we've measured our soil carbon down to 1 meter deep. And that has given us an unprecedented baseline to which we will revisit every 5 years. But it has also shown on my farm, I have 5 totally different historic land uses. I've got 250-year-old deciduous trees, in my case, oak trees. I have 30-year-old oak trees. I have 120 years of what we call silver pasture, that's trees and grass together. I've got 200-year-old grazing ground for cattle, and I've got my 30-year-old willow trees. And what we found in soil organic carbon stocks, our silver pasture was way in front of everything else by about 40%. And that is to do with the complex root architecture of having plant diversity. We've got grass roots to 15 centimeters. We've got legume roots to 30 centimeters. We've got herb roots down to 60 centimeters, and we've got tree roots down to 1 meter. They're all photosynthesizing. They're all issuing root exudate, laying down new carbon, but they're doing it over the whole depth of the soil. We are not getting that on our monocultures, whether it's a monoculture of grass or a monoculture of oak trees. In our case of our oak trees, we have carbon, but it's deep, it's not shallow. In our grass, we've got carbon, but it's shallow, not deep. And our silver pasture allows us to actually deliver carbon at all lengths. But we were also able to look at our soil biology, where we looked at earthworm counts, we looked at our soil respiration, we looked at bacterial fungi communities. And that is where we also had our eye opened, where we saw the real advantage of having livestock feces or livestock dung being excreted on the soil and inoculating their fungi from the gut of the cow, inoculating the microbiome of the soil and seeing that energizing the microbiome. So seeing that circular system of animals, trees, and plants all in the same space, giving you a really good, complex, but stable system where you're delivering multiple public goods at the same time. And certainly what we have seen, extremism, whether it's extreme human diets or whether it's extreme landscape management, all trees or all food production, what we're finding is the compromise is somewhere in between.
What are the next steps in this project that has a whole holistic approach?
So the next step is, can we leverage the knowledge we've gained? And so I started with 1 research farm just north of Dublin. I then leveraged it into 7 farms through the EP Agri Operational Groups. So we're very grateful for DG Agriculture for supporting us on that, is that we leveraged that into 7 farms. And now in the UK, I'm helping with the agricultural levy boards, and we're now going to leverage it onto 170 farms. At the same time, I've spoken with the Northern Irish government, and the Northern Irish government are the first government anywhere in the world to actually go out and create a scheme to baseline every field, every tree, every hedge in the country. And Northern Ireland is now, we're doing it over 4 years. We're now our 3rd year. The response of farmers has been astonishing. 92% of all eligible farmers have now applied for what we call the Soil Nutrient Health Scheme, of doing this baseline, of giving farmers extraordinarily granular detail of their own farm and allowing them to make better quality decisions. That is really, we believe that is the bedrock for behavioral change, for a positive acceleration on the journey that we need to go on.
What are the issues that you have found regarding the scalability of this project, and what challenges arise when attempting to replicate the model?
Well, I mean, there are both, threats and opportunities. The threat is it's a big cost. So in Northern Ireland, the cost is 38 million pounds, so just over 40 million euro. We're doing just under 1 million hectares, and we're doing it over 4 years. But that is roughly, if you annualize that, that's roughly 3% of total public subvention to agriculture in Northern Ireland. And we believe that's a price worth paying as such. Now, to get that, we had to buy the support of the farming community. the support of the environmental community, but most importantly, the support of the public purse and politicians. Because the issue that the success we've had in Northern Ireland is the baseline where you measure, report, and verify with this degree of granularity, integrity, is a public good. And at the moment, we are too quick in governments and at the European Union level to say that's the private sector's job. Well, the only reason we're doing this is to prove that there's integrity in this journey. And actually, if there's one thing the public purse should pay for, it should pay for integrity, being the controller of integrity. And I will argue that actually, you should not be pushing the actual process of measuring, reporting, and verification or certification onto the private sector. That is something that government should take control of. And I know certainly this is a big debate in Brussels at the moment around the carbon removal certification framework, is that certainly there's an agreement in principle to one certification system for carbon removals. But actually, what degree of MRV are we going to use? And I'm aware that there is a meeting ongoing in Brussels as I speak at the moment, actually looking at this. And my plea, and I had the privilege 2 weeks ago to share the platform with some of the DG Climate team. And I just said, listen, here's a plea. Don't discount MRV. Either do MRV right or don't do it at all. And to do it right, it will cost you initially. And certainly ours has cost us. But what we are seeing, I know from the time I did my aerial LiDAR survey to the Northern Ireland government did their LiDAR survey. We did 1,000 hectares, they're doing just short of 1 million hectares. The price of LiDAR came down by something like 40%. Okay? So once we get a couple of iterations, the cost of measuring, reporting, and verifying will have dropped dramatically. Second of all, we will have calibrated our landscapes. Our work with Earth observation from satellites will be able to be ground truth better and be more reliable. And that was certainly the big message that came out of Copenhagen 2 weeks ago, is how do we make Earth observation more reliable? How do we ground truth it better? And I will argue there is nothing better than actually pump priming that with 2 iterations of baselining the whole landscape across Europe. So you've got the landscape calibrated already, okay? Also, if you do it the second time, and you've caught the behavioral changes, you can start to improve what we call the factors, whether it be emission factors or sequestration factor. So that for the bits that we do have the model, we're using better, accurate data across different soil types. Because as sure as anything, the soil I have, my farm is different to the farm you will have, Fernando, or anything else, is that soil is variable. The land use is variable. The climate is variable, and how we manage it is variable. So there are too many variables. So we actually need to go measure and calibrate it. And from that calibration, build your Earth observation industry on top of that, so that in 15 years' time, we have a low-cost, sophisticated system that we need very little boots on the ground, but we've done it with integrity. And that's my plea. It was my plea, very public plea from the platform in Copenhagen 2 weeks ago, is don't discount this. Don't shortchange us. If you want serious land managers like me to go on this journey, and if we step up and do the delivering, I want an MRV that will pick up the consequence of my change and not to change. And people look at me when I say that. So if I go from a monoculture of grass to multi-species swards, I will have more carbon and deeper. I want a soil carbon measurement to pick that up. And at the moment, going to one depth will never pick that up. And so we want a robust system that will actually pick up the changes that we can make, that make economic sense in our farm, but also make climate sense too.
In an interview last year, you mentioned that you believe a new legal framework towards net zero is needed. Could you elaborate on this?
Well, it was actually my inaugural lecture at Queen's University Belfast when I was accepted as Professor of Practice. And my inaugural lecture was about creating a single public-private framework to deliver net zero for farming. And my frustration is one day I'm speaking to a set of policymakers who have responsibility for the national greenhouse gas inventory, and giving advice to governments. The next day, I'm speaking to retailers and processors who are caught under the greenhouse gas protocol and the science-based targets initiatives. Okay, and they're all looking for data off farms. Okay, but the two vehicles are not talking to each other. And they think, well, you'll do as I'm told. Your supplier will ask it, and you'll do it, or else I'm not buying your raw material from you. Okay, and then the government says, well, you'll do it because I'll not give you a subsidy if you don't do it. And I'm turning this around, and I'm putting a mirror on both of them, and saying it's bad enough having to collect the data once, but to collect the data a second time, to give it to a second vehicle, to give me two totally different answers because your methodologies don't talk to each other, is bonkers. And all you do is confuse farmers. So the system that we're going down the line in Northern Ireland is we will have one calculator, and that calculator will have enough sophistication that it will be able to report to Scope 3 declarations. At the same time, it will be able to report to the custodians of the Greenhouse Gas National Inventory. Lift once, use many times with the permission of farmers. The idea that you're going to have two totally different vehicles about the journey to net zero coming to bombard farmers, busy farmers, that you're going to repeat giving the data. And then when they give you results, it's a different result to the one that I got from the other side. So we need to start talking to each other. And I am quite vociferous about this. Governments and the retail sector hate me because they're all quite happy to sit in their own little silos. Well, I'm a farmer. I work with farmers, and I can tell you now, the industry, governments will never be forgiven if you stay with two completely different mechanisms to report a journey to net zero, and they don't talk to each other. They don't use the same metrics. They don't use the same factors. Surprise, surprise, farmers will walk away from you. And that is not what we need. We need farmers fully engaged. I'm just saying, can we have some common sense? We've got a phrase in Ireland, the one thing about common sense, that is that common sense is never common. And we need to bring some common sense in here. Lift data once, use many times. We need the public and private sectors to be talking to each other. And I was delighted to see at the end of the DG Klima presentation in Copenhagen, Valeria Forlund, who spoke on behalf of DG Klima, called it out that the carbon removal certification framework will need to report back to the Greenhouse Gas National Inventory. And I absolutely concur with her on that.
The last few questions I have aimed at a more personal perspective. It is evident that you are driven by passion, but what else drives you to continue working for soil health and climate change mitigation?
Well, first and foremost, I'm a fifth generation farmer. And farming and farmers get bad press. Yet actually, some of the most dynamic, multidisciplined, skilled people in Europe sit on farms. Okay? Nobody knows more about sustainability than a farming family. My sixth generation are now running the farm while I'm off helping others. The seventh generation are really there. And you know, the one thing about a farming family is they want to leave the next generation the farm in better shape than they got it. That is the core of what is right about the European model of keeping farming families on the land. They are absolutely passionate, and they have this love for their farm, their landscape, their soil, their assets, and they want to leave it in better condition than when they inherited it. And I am no different. What is added to that, I'm also a grandfather. And do you know something, when you get old, cranky and grey like me, do you know something, your patience becomes thin and you just tell it as you see it. And I'm guilty of that. I do believe that the media have misrepresented farming families. I do believe that particularly in livestock agriculture, they have wrongly maligned much of ruminant agriculture, where ruminant delivers multiple public goods and not just belching methane, which is what they are labeled for. I gave recently an interview to a well-known UK media outlet, which has published an 8-page article of my work, but it took 6 weeks of negotiation to get it there. They could not believe a livestock farm today could be beyond net zero. And they went round the country trying to find professors who would come out and criticize me, and they failed. Our facts tell the story that actually when you look at a farm as a business, not as an animal, if you look at the totality of their assets and how you use those assets, there are an awful lot of our farms could get to net zero really quite quickly. Our difficulty is our reporting mechanism does not allow that, particularly the greenhouse gas ash inventory. I engage in 4 different parts of the silo, and currently we are not allowed to inset to report the overall performance of the business. I can't set sequestration against the unavoidable emissions coming from the rumen. I can't set my renewables against that or any of my waste management. And that is wrong, is that within a business, this isn't offsetting, this is insetting within a business that's auditable, transparent, accountable. That should absolutely be allowed so that we unshackle farmers, farm decision makers and farm businesses to use every tool in the toolbox that is appropriate for their business to reach. And we're not good at that. Our reporting mechanism does not allow that or recognize that, and that is wrong.
How do you envision your region in 50 years, the one that future generations will live in?
Well, for me, as far as I'm concerned, probably one of the best documents I have read in the last 18 months was actually a document from the FAO. And it was about delivering SDG 2, which is eliminating hunger for humans, and 1.5 degree temperature rise. Now, I actually really love that report because for the first time, it's joined at the hip, human health and environmental health, because I'm passionate about the concept of one health. It's what I do in the soil absolutely impacts on human health and environmental health. And at the moment, it's not appreciated. And also when I look at human health, if I look at recent data I've seen in the United Kingdom, 45% of young ladies between the age of 15 and 25 are eating below the recommendation of iron. And we've seen a doubling over the last 9 years of the amount of people submitted to hospital with iron anemia deficiency. Now, that is because of extremism. We need to go back and look at what is a balanced diet and what is the food system that we build around that to deliver a balanced diet for humans. And surprise, surprise, what we saw in our research is when it comes to animals, animals are like humans. Animals like a balanced diet too. And we as farmers need to get our head around that as well. And it's really interesting when I ran a research farm in the Republic of Ireland, what we found when we gave our animals what we call multi-species swards, so grasses, herbs and legumes all together, we had a 17% improvement in live weight gain in cattle and a 32% improvement in lamb. Quite astonishing. Why? Because animals are like humans, they like a balanced diet too. And the lesson we've learned on our own farm, cattle were browsers before they were grazers, and actually bringing tree fodder in along with herbs, legumes and grass. You've got an extraordinary thing where animals self-medicate. They can really build up their own immunity for parasitic worms. We get good live weight gain. They are content and happy. I just think I look back at what my great-grandparents did and what my grandparents did on our family farm. And it's really interesting. A lot of what I'm now doing, it's very similar to what my great-grandparents did. The difference is in 2024, we now have the science to understand why my great-grandparents were correct. They didn't have it, but they saw through observations. They were very observant, and they didn't have any of our modern measurement technology. Now in 2024, we do. We have the science behind it. And I think what we need to look at is we need to dial down the extremism in livestock production, in food production, but also in the diets that we as humans eat too. There is a balance, there is a happy medium, and that is where we need to be looking at.
And lastly, is there a question I haven't asked that you wish I had? Is there anything else you would like to highlight, or any message that you would like to leave for our listeners?
I think that the key message I would like is about how we better integrate this huge discussion within the wider society. For the first year on our family farm, in Northern Ireland, we have a thing called Open Farm Weekend, where the farming community open up their gates and let the public come in and come and visit us. We were blown away. We thought we might have 300, 400 people. In 2 days, we had 1,700 people came to visit our farm. We were blown away, one, by their interest, two, their questions, and three, the feedback. And I don't believe we do this enough, that we actually open up the gates and we actually let wider society, who know farming exists but never really put on a pair of welly boots and gone and find an earthworm or whatever else, okay? One of the most fun things we did in the last year, with the help of one of my Wagnum students, is we did the dirty undies test, where we buried pieces of big old ladies' bloomers, and we buried them for 3 months, and we dug them back up, and what did we find? Is the microbes of the soil, where the soil was really healthy, ate all the cotton. Where the soil wasn't healthy, didn't damage the cotton at all. And it was so fascinating. People were intrigued, and it really brought alive that the soil, remember, 60% of the world's biodiversity is under your feet in the soil. And this just brought it alive. It was citizen science, really graphic. And people went, wow, I need to stop calling it dirt and call it soil instead. This is, we need more of that, because then that means then people have respect for land managers and farmers like me, and I have respect for what consumers have, but we have a vehicle for engagement, for dialogue, for debate, but it dials down this real worry that I have is extremism. And extremism in food production and human health gets us nowhere. We need to rally around, all of us as a society, around one health. And I take my hat off for the FAO guidance that we got through that report, delivering SDG 2 and 1.5 degree temperature rise at the same time.
John, thank you so much for your time and for joining our podcast.
It's a pleasure, Fernando. Thank you very much.
This is Rooted to Earth.